I never thought painting my house would lead to a war, but then again, I had never dealt with Patricia Whitmore before. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in May, slipped into my mailbox like a ticking time bomb wrapped in official HOA letterhead. I was halfway through my coffee when I opened it, standing in my driveway in Phoenix, Arizona, still wearing my pajama pants because I worked from home and could get away with that kind of thing. The words jumped off the page like accusations. Notice of violation in bold red letters, followed by a list of complaints about my house's exterior paint that made my blood pressure spike. According to Patricia Whitmore, president of the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association, my house was an eyesore. The pale yellow I had chosen when I moved in 3 years ago was apparently no longer within the approved color palette, even though it had been perfectly fine when I bought the place. The previous owner had painted it that color, and I had fallen in love with it. It reminded me of sunshine and optimism, two things that felt in short supply lately after my divorce. But Patricia did not care about my emotional attachment to pale yellow. The letter demanded I repaint my entire house within 30 days or face daily fines of $200. And here was the kicker. I had to choose from the HOA-approved color palette, which consisted entirely of various shades of beige, tan, and brown. Not a single interesting color in the bunch. I read the letter 3 times, feeling my jaw clench tighter with each pass. This was ridiculous. My house looked fine. Better than fine, actually. I kept the yard immaculate, the hedges trimmed, the driveway pressure washed. I was a model neighbor who kept to himself and never complained about anything. And now Patricia Whitmore wanted to force me to paint my house the color of cardboard. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor, Derek, who lived 2 houses down. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding half asleep even though it was almost 9 in the morning. "Did you get one too?" I asked without preamble. "Get what?" Derek yawned into the phone. "A violation letter from the HOA. "Oh, that. Yeah, I got one last month." They made me take down my basketball hoop because it was not aesthetically pleasing, cost me a fortune in fines before I caved. I felt my stomach sink. They can actually enforce this stuff, unfortunately, yes. When you bought your house, you signed the HOA agreement. They have legal authority to enforce the rules, and Patricia takes that very seriously. Too seriously, if you ask me. After hanging up with Derek, I did what any reasonable person would do in 2025. I went down a rabbit hole of internet research about HOA regulations in Arizona. What I found was both enlightening and infuriating. Technically, the HOA could enforce these rules, but they also had to follow certain procedures. They needed to give proper notice, allow for appeals, and maintain consistency in enforcement. And here was the interesting part. They had to stick to their own approved lists. I dug out the HOA documents from the filing cabinet in my home office, buried under old tax returns and insurance papers. The covenant conditions and restrictions were 73 pages of dense legal language that I had skimmed exactly once when I bought the house. Now, I read every word, paying special attention to the section about exterior modifications. Sure enough, there was an approved color palette attached as an appendix, but when I looked closer, I noticed something interesting. The palette had been updated in January of this year, 4 months ago, and the updated version included some truly hideous colors. There was desert khaki, which looked like the color of dust, adobe sunset, which was basically brown with a hint of orange, sandstone beige, which was just depressing. But buried at the bottom of the list was something called millennial beige, and when I looked up the color code online, I had to laugh. Millennial beige was technically a beige color, but it was the most aggressively ugly beige I had ever seen. It was that greige color that had been trendy for about 15 minutes in interior design before everyone realized it made everything look sad and lifeless. It had undertones of purple and gray that somehow combined to create a color that looked different depending on the light, and never in a good way. It was the kind of color that made people vaguely uncomfortable without being able to pinpoint why. And it was absolutely 100% on the HOA-approved list. I could feel a smile spreading across my face as an idea began to form. If Patricia Whitmore wanted to play hardball with me, I would play right back, but I would follow the rules to the letter. The next morning, I drove to the local planning office to pull the official HOA documents and make sure I had the most current approved color list. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Susan, helped me navigate the filing system and made copies of everything I needed. I asked her if many people came in requesting HOA documents. "Oh, all the time," she said, stapling my copies together. "Usually people who are about to go to war with their HOA, you have that look about you if you do not mind me saying. Is it that obvious?" "Honey, I have worked here for 15 years. I can spot an HOA dispute from a mile away. My advice: document everything, follow their rules exactly, and do not give them any ammunition. They are usually looking for reasons to fine you more." I thanked Susan and headed home, stopping at a paint store on the way. I showed the clerk the color code for millennial beige and asked to see a sample. When he mixed it up and painted a swatch, even he made a face. "You sure about this color?" he asked. "It is kind of intense." "I am very sure," I said. "I need enough to paint a 2,000 square foot house exterior." He calculated the quantity and I winced at the price. Painting a house was not cheap, especially not in Phoenix where you needed paint that could withstand the brutal desert sun. But I was committed now. This was about principle. Before I ordered the paint, though, I needed to do this properly. I drafted a letter to the HOA board requesting approval for my color choice, citing the specific color code from their approved list. I included pictures of my current house and a mock-up showing what it would look like in millennial beige, which I created using a photo editing app. The result was even worse than I had imagined. My cheerful little ranch house looked like it belonged in a Depression-era photograph. I submitted the request through the HOA's online portal and sent a physical copy via certified mail, return receipt requested. Susan's advice echoed in my mind: document everything. 2 weeks passed with no response. According to the HOA bylaws, they had 15 business days to respond to color approval requests, and they were cutting it close. On the 14th business day, I received an email from Patricia Whitmore herself. The email was curt and impersonal. "Your color selection has been approved as it appears on the current approved palette. Please complete the painting within the required time frame to avoid further fines." I read the email 5 times, searching for any hint of emotion or awareness that she knew exactly what color I had chosen. There was nothing. Either Patricia had not actually looked at the color, or she had the world's best poker face. I called 3 painting contractors for quotes. The first 2 were booked solid for the next month, which would put me past my deadline. The third, a guy named Miguel who ran a small family operation, said he could start in 1 week if I was willing to pay a rush fee. I agreed immediately. Miguel showed up the following Tuesday with his crew of 4 guys, all wearing matching shirts with Ramirez painting emblazoned on the back. He took one look at the color code I handed him and raised his eyebrows. "This is what you want?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "This is what the HOA approved," I replied. Miguel shrugged. "Your house, man, we will make it happen." The crew started early the next morning, pressure washing the existing paint and prepping the surfaces. I watched from inside, working at my dining room table with my laptop, occasionally glancing out to see the progress. My house was starting to look naked and vulnerable, stripped of its cheerful yellow coating. By Thursday, they started applying the primer. Friday, the first coat of millennial beige went on, and I stepped outside to inspect it. Even in its first coat patchy state, I could tell this was going to be spectacular in the worst possible way. The color seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, giving my house a strange, almost hollow appearance. Miguel came over, wiping his hands on a rag. "I have been painting houses for 20 years," he said, shaking his head. "This is the ugliest color I have ever seen on an exterior." "No offense, none taken. That is kind of the point," he laughed. "HOA troubles, you could say that. I painted a house once where the owner did the entire thing in this approved green that looked like baby vomit. The HOA president lived across the street and had to look at it every day. She tried to get him to change it, but it was on the approved list. He sold the house 2 years later, and the first thing the new owners did was repaint it." "What happened to the HOA president?" I asked. "She moved." Miguel grinned. "Could not stand looking at that green house anymore." Over the weekend, Miguel's crew applied the second coat, and by Monday morning my house was completely transformed. And by transformed, I mean it looked absolutely terrible. The millennial beige was even worse than I had hoped. In the morning light, it looked grayish-purple. At noon, it shifted to a sickly greenish tan. In the evening, it took on a bruised, brownish hue that made the house look diseased, but it was absolutely, unquestionably on the HOA-approved list. I paid Miguel, adding a generous tip for his crew, and waited. I did not have to wait long. Patricia Whitmore appeared at my door on Tuesday morning, approximately 48 hours after the paint job was complete. She was exactly what I had imagined. A woman in her early 50s with a severe haircut, wearing pressed khakis and a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on it. She carried an iPad and had the pinched expression of someone who smelled something bad. "Mr. Harrison," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "we need to talk about your house." "Hello, Patricia, please call me James. What about my house?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe and sipping my coffee. "The color, it is unacceptable, really, because I have the approval email right here." I pulled out my phone and showed her the email she had sent. "You approved this color. It is number 47 on the approved palette, millennial beige." Patricia's face flushed red. We did not realize you would choose that particular shade. But it is approved, correct? Technically, yes, but then I do not see the problem. You gave me 30 days to repaint my house in an approved color. I did exactly that. I even got your explicit written approval before starting." Patricia's jaw worked silently for a moment. "The color is disruptive to the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. It is beige. You told me to paint my house beige. I painted my house beige. This is not what we meant, and you know it." I took another sip of my coffee, maintaining eye contact. "What I know is that I followed your rules exactly. I submitted my color choice through proper channels. You approved it in writing. I hired a licensed contractor and completed the work within the required time frame. If you have a problem with the color, maybe you should review your approved palette." Patricia's hands were shaking slightly as she clutched her iPad. "This is not over, Mr. Harrison. The board will be reviewing this matter. You do what you need to do," I said calmly. "I will be here in my properly painted, HOA-approved house." After she left, I noticed neighbors starting to emerge from their houses. Some walked their dogs past my place, slowing down to stare. Others drove by at a crawl, gawking at the new paint job. By afternoon, my doorbell had rung 4 times with neighbors I barely knew stopping by to see the color up close. Derek came over around 5, carrying 2 beers. "Dude," he said, handing me one and staring at my house. "What did you do?" "I followed the rules," I said, accepting the beer gratefully. "It is horrible, I mean really, truly awful, but it is genius. Patricia must be losing her mind. She stopped by this morning. She is not happy." Derek laughed, nearly choking on his beer. "Not happy. That is the understatement of the year. She is probably drafting a 20-page memo right now about how this is a violation of something." He was not far off. 3 days later, I received another certified letter from the HOA. This one informed me that the board had determined my paint color, while technically on the approved list, violated the spirit of the aesthetic guidelines. They were requesting I repaint the house in a more suitable color within 30 days or face fines of $500 per day. I read the letter carefully, then read it again. This was exactly the kind of overreach I had been hoping for. They were admitting my color was approved, but trying to enforce some nebulous spirit of the guidelines that was not actually written anywhere in the bylaws. I made copies of everything, organized my documentation, and scheduled an appointment with a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Rachel Chen, and her office was in downtown Phoenix. She came highly recommended by several online reviews from people who had successfully fought their HOAs. Rachel was younger than I expected, probably in her mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened to my story, examined my documents, and then smiled in a way that made me think she enjoyed this kind of case. "They are violating their own bylaws," she said, tapping the HOA's letter. "They cannot approve a color and then fine you for using it based on some undefined spirit of the guidelines. That is not how contracts work. You have excellent documentation here, which helps enormously." "So what do?" I asked. "First, we respond to their letter with a detailed explanation of why their position is legally untenable. We cite the relevant sections of the bylaws, reference your approval email, and make it clear that you will not be repainting or paying any fines. Second, we wait to see if they are stupid enough to actually start fining you, which would give us grounds for a lawsuit. You think they will back down?" Rachel leaned back in her chair. "Depends on how stubborn they are. Some HOA boards realize when they are beaten and quietly back off. Others double down and end up costing their members thousands in legal fees fighting a losing battle. From what you have told me about Patricia Whitmore, I suspect she is in the second category." Rachel drafted a response letter that was a beautiful blend of legal precision and polite aggression. It laid out my case point by point, referenced specific sections of Arizona HOA law, and concluded with a gentle reminder that pursuing baseless fines could expose the HOA to liability for harassment and emotional distress. We sent the letter via certified mail and email, and I waited for the response. It came faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, I received an email from Patricia scheduling an emergency board meeting to address the matter. The meeting was open to all HOA members per the bylaws and was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7 in the evening at the community center. I forwarded the email to Rachel, who responded immediately, "I will be there. This should be interesting." The week leading up to the meeting was tense. I noticed Patricia driving past my house multiple times, always slowing down to glare at the millennial beige exterior. Other neighbors started taking sides. Some left notes in my mailbox expressing support, saying the HOA had too much power and needed to be challenged. Others were less friendly, leaving anonymous notes calling me selfish and disruptive. Derek kept me updated on the neighborhood gossip. "People are talking about nothing else," he told me over the fence one afternoon. "The Facebook group is going crazy. Half the neighborhood thinks you are a hero, the other half thinks you are deliberately causing problems." "I just wanted to paint my house," I said, though we both knew that was not entirely true anymore. This had become about something bigger. Thursday evening arrived, and I dressed carefully in business casual attire. Rachel met me in the parking lot of the community center, carrying a leather briefcase that looked expensive and official. "Ready?" she asked. "As I will ever be." The community center's meeting room was packed. Every chair was filled with people standing along the walls. I recognized most of the faces from seeing them around the neighborhood, though I had never spoken to many of them. The air was thick with tension and curiosity. Patricia sat at a table at the front of the room, flanked by 4 other board members I recognized only vaguely. She was wearing a blazer and had her hair pulled back severely, looking every inch the officious bureaucrat. When she saw me walk in with Rachel, her eyes narrowed. The meeting started with standard HOA business: approval of previous meeting minutes, discussion of landscaping contracts, a proposal to upgrade the community pool. I barely paid attention, focused on what was coming. Finally, after 30 minutes of routine matters, Patricia cleared her throat. "We now move to new business," she said, her voice carrying through the room. "Specifically, the matter of 2847 Saguaro Heights Drive and the inappropriate paint color." A murmur went through the crowd. Patricia projected a photo of my house onto the screen behind her. In the harsh flash of the photograph, the millennial beige looked even worse than it did in person. Several people gasped. "As you can see," Patricia continued, "Mr. James Harrison has painted his house in a color that, while technically appearing on our approved palette, is clearly not in keeping with the aesthetic standards of our community. This is a deliberate attempt to undermine the authority of this board and to create discord in our neighborhood." Rachel stood up smoothly. "May I address the board?" Patricia looked annoyed but nodded curtly. "You are Rachel Chen, attorney representing Mr. Harrison. I would like to clarify several points for the board and the community members present." Patricia's face went pale. "This is not a legal proceeding. We do not need lawyers here. With all due respect, you turned this into a legal matter when you threatened my client with fines for complying with your own rules. May I continue?" Patricia sat down heavily, gesturing for Rachel to proceed. Rachel walked to the front of the room, projecting calm authority. "Let me lay out the timeline of events. In early May, Mr. Harrison received a violation notice requiring him to repaint his house in an HOA-approved color within 30 days. He submitted a color choice request, including the specific color code, through the proper channels. The board approved his request in writing. He hired a licensed contractor and completed the work within the time frame. Everything was done by the book." She clicked a remote, and the screen changed to show the email exchange between me and Patricia. "This is the approval email from Miss Whitmore herself. There is no ambiguity here. The board approved millennial beige color code listed on page 37 of the current approved palette." "We made a mistake," Patricia said, her voice tight. "We did not realize how bad that color would look." "That is not Mr. Harrison's problem," Rachel said calmly. "You are the board. You are responsible for knowing what is on your approved list. You cannot approve something in writing and then penalize someone for using it because you did not do your homework." A man in the front row stood up. I recognized him as Bill Thompson, another board member. "What about the aesthetic harmony clause in our bylaws? That gives us discretion to reject things that disrupt the neighborhood's appearance." Rachel nodded as if she had been expecting this. "Good question. Let me read that clause exactly." She pulled out a copy of the bylaws and read aloud. "The HOA board maintains discretion to reject proposed modifications that disrupt the aesthetic harmony of the community, provided such rejection is made in writing within 15 business days of the initial request." She paused for effect. "There are two critical points here. First, the rejection must be made within 15 business days of the request. The board did not reject Mr. Harrison's color choice. They approved it. Second, this discretion applies to the initial approval process, not after the fact. You cannot approve something and then retroactively decide you do not like it." "This is nonsense," Patricia said, standing up. He knew exactly what he was doing. This was a deliberate attempt to make the neighborhood look bad. "My client followed your rules," Rachel said, her voice hardening slightly. "If you do not like the results, perhaps you should reconsider the rules themselves, but you cannot punish him for your own poor planning." The room erupted in crosstalk. Some people were shouting support for my position, others for the HOA. Patricia was banging a gavel, trying to restore order. The meeting was devolving into chaos. Finally, an older woman in the back stood up, and something about her presence made everyone quiet down. I had seen her around the neighborhood, always impeccably dressed and walking a small white dog. Her name was Margaret, and according to Derek, she had lived in Saguaro Heights since the development was built in the 1990s. "May I say something?" Margaret asked, her voice clear and firm. Patricia nodded, looking wary. "I have lived in this community for 28 years. I have seen 5 different HOA boards, and I have watched this organization become increasingly rigid and punitive over time. What started as a group meant to maintain basic standards has turned into something that micromanages every aspect of our homes and our lives. She gestured toward the screen showing my house. Is that color attractive? No, it is not. But you know what? It is not Mr. Harrison's fault. He did not write the approved palette. The board did. And if the board was careless enough to include a color on that list without properly evaluating it, that is their mistake, not his. Patricia started to speak, but Margaret held up her hand. I am not finished. I am tired of this board acting like petty dictators. I am tired of violation notices and fines over minor issues. I am tired of living in a community where we are afraid to make any changes to our own homes without permission from people who seem to enjoy exercising power over their neighbors. The room was completely silent now. Margaret looked around at the assembled residents. I propose we use this situation as an opportunity to review and reform our approved palette and our enforcement procedures. Clearly, they are not working. And I further propose that we drop any threats of fines against Mr. Harrison, who has done nothing wrong except expose the flaws in our own system. The applause started slowly but built into a wave that filled the room. Patricia looked stunned, her face cycling through shades of red and white. The other board members were whispering urgently to each other. Rachel leaned over and whispered to me, "I think you just won." But Patricia was not ready to concede defeat. She banged her gavel again, calling for order. We will take Margaret's suggestions under advisement. However, the board maintains its position that Mr. Harrison's paint color violates the spirit of our aesthetic guidelines. We will be moving forward with fines unless he repaints within 30 days. The room exploded in angry shouts. People were on their feet, yelling at the board. I saw several people pull out their phones, presumably to record what was happening. This was escalating beyond anything I had anticipated. Rachel stood up, her voice cutting through the noise. Then we will see you in court. And when we do, we will be seeking not only injunctive relief, but also damages for harassment, emotional distress, and violation of Arizona HOA regulations. Furthermore, we will be requesting that the court order an independent audit of HOA finances and enforcement actions to determine if there is a pattern of selective or discriminatory enforcement. That last part made Patricia go very still. What are you implying? I am not implying anything. I am stating facts. My client has been singled out for enforcement while other homes in this neighborhood have various violations that go unaddressed. For example, 2901 Saguaro Heights Drive has been parking an RV in their driveway for 6 months, which is clearly prohibited. 2756 Saguaro Heights Drive has a satellite dish visible from the street, also prohibited. Should I continue? Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Bill Thompson leaned over and whispered something urgently to her. She shook her head stubbornly. This meeting is adjourned, Patricia announced, gathering her papers. The board will meet in executive session to discuss our options. As people filed out of the community center, dozens of neighbors came up to me. Some shook my hand, others patted me on the back. Derek was grinning like a fool. Margaret gave me an approving nod as she walked past with her small white dog. In the parking lot, Rachel turned to me. That went better than I expected. The fact that Patricia is digging in despite the obvious legal problems suggests this has become personal for her. That works in our favor. How so? I asked. Because boards that make decisions based on personal grudges rather than legal reasoning tend to make mistakes. Big mistakes that cost them in court. She paused. Are you prepared for this to get ugly? Because it probably will before it gets better. I looked back at the community center, thinking about Patricia's stubborn refusal to back down, about the divided neighborhood, about my house painted in that awful millennial beige. I am in too deep to back out now. Good. Document everything from here on out. Every interaction with the HOA, every letter, every email, if they start fining you, do not pay the fines. Let them accumulate. It will strengthen our case. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 things happened. First, I received daily violation notices from the HOA, each one more threatening than the last. The fines started accumulating, $500 per day, just as they had threatened. After 14 days, they claimed I owed $7,000. Second, the local news picked up the story. A reporter named Jennifer Alvarez from a Phoenix television station contacted me after seeing posts about the situation on social media. She came out with a camera crew and did a segment about my ugly house rebellion against HOA overreach. The segment aired during prime time and went viral online. Suddenly, I was getting calls from news outlets across the country wanting to talk about HOA abuse and homeowner rights. Third, and most interestingly, I started receiving information from other Saguaro Heights residents about Patricia Whitmore's HOA presidency. It turned out I was not the first person she had targeted with aggressive enforcement actions. But what made the information truly valuable was what people told me about the HOA's finances. A woman named Sandra, who lived 4 streets over, came to my door one evening with a manila folder full of printed documents. "I used to be on the HOA board," she explained, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I resigned 2 years ago because I could not stomach what Patricia was doing. But I kept copies of everything." I invited her in and made coffee while she spread the documents across my dining room table. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Evidence that Patricia has been using HOA funds inappropriately. See this." She pointed to a series of expense reports. "These are payments to a landscaping company owned by her brother-in-law. She awarded him the contract without competitive bidding, and the prices are inflated by at least 30% compared to market rates." I felt my pulse quicken. That is fraud. It gets worse. Look at these. Sandra showed me more documents. She has been selectively enforcing rules to drive out residents she does not like, usually people who questioned her decisions. Once they move, her real estate agent friend gets the listing. They have done this with at least 6 properties in the last 3 years. "Why did not you report this before?" I asked. Sandra looked ashamed. "I was scared. Patricia can be vindictive. She threatened to fine me into oblivion if I caused trouble, but watching what she is doing to you and seeing you actually fight back, it made me realize I have been a coward." I immediately called Rachel and explained what Sandra had brought me. Rachel asked us to meet her at her office first thing the next morning. At Rachel's office, she went through Sandra's documents methodically, asking questions and taking notes. When she finished, she sat back and let out a low whistle. "This is worse than I thought. We are not just talking about an HOA overstepping its authority. This is potentially criminal fraud and embezzlement." "What do we do?" I asked. "We need to bring this to the attention of the proper authorities. The Arizona Corporation Commission oversees HOAs in the state. They have investigative powers, and if there is criminal wrongdoing, we may need to involve law enforcement." Sandra looked terrified. "Will I get in trouble for taking these documents?" "No," Rachel assured her. "You were a board member at the time, you had legitimate access to this information, and reporting suspected fraud is protected activity. Patricia cannot retaliate against you for this." Over the next several days, Rachel filed formal complaints with the Arizona Corporation Commission and prepared a comprehensive lawsuit against the HOA. The lawsuit sought injunctive relief preventing them from fining me, damages for harassment and emotional distress, and attorney's fees. It also requested a court-ordered forensic audit of the HOA's finances. The lawsuit was filed on a Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, I had reporters camped out in front of my millennial beige house. The story had grown beyond just a quirky dispute about paint colors. Now it was about corruption and abuse of power in HOA governance. Patricia's response was swift and predictable. She sent an email to all HOA members claiming I was making false accusations to avoid taking responsibility for violating community standards. She insisted the HOA's finances were completely transparent and proper, and she accused Sandra of theft and lying. But Patricia had made a critical error. By sending that email, she had put her denials in writing. And when the Corporation Commission investigators showed up at the HOA's property management office requesting financial records, those denials would be tested against actual evidence. The investigation moved faster than I expected. The Corporation Commission took financial fraud seriously, especially in HOA cases where residents had mandatory dues and limited options to escape mismanagement. Within 2 weeks, they had uncovered enough irregularities to warrant expanding their investigation and bringing in forensic accountants. Meanwhile, my lawsuit was moving forward. Rachel filed for a temporary restraining order against the HOA to prevent them from collecting the accumulated fines while the case was pending. The hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning in Maricopa County Superior Court. Judge Michael Torres presided over the hearing. He was a middle-aged man with a reputation for being no-nonsense and impatient with frivolous arguments. I sat next to Rachel at the plaintiff's table while the HOA's attorney, a nervous-looking man named Robert Franklin, sat across the aisle with Patricia and Bill Thompson. Rachel presented our case efficiently, walking the judge through the timeline of events, and the documentation showing I had followed all proper procedures. She highlighted the email approval from Patricia and explained how the HOA was now trying to punish me for using a color they had specifically approved. Robert Franklin argued that the board had discretion to maintain aesthetic standards and that my paint color clearly violated those standards, regardless of the technical approval. He tried to frame it as a matter of community preservation. Judge Torres listened to both sides, reviewing the documents on his computer screen. Finally, he looked up and fixed Robert Franklin with a steady gaze. "Counselor, help me understand something," Judge Torres said. "Your client approved this specific color in writing, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor, but—" "And the color is on the HOA's approved palette, correct?" "Technically, yes, but the board did not realize." "So the board approved a color without knowing what it looked like and now wants to fine Mr. Harrison for their own failure to do due diligence." Robert Franklin seemed to struggle for words. "Your Honor, this is about the spirit of the guidelines, not just the letter of the law." Judge Torres leaned back in his chair. "The spirit of the guidelines, Mr. Franklin, this is a contract dispute. Contracts are enforced based on their written terms, not some nebulous spirit that can be interpreted however someone feels on any given day. Your client approved this color. They cannot now claim it violates their guidelines." He turned to his computer and typed something. "I am granting the temporary restraining order. The HOA is enjoined from collecting any fines related to the paint color at 2847 Saguaro Heights Drive pending resolution of this case. Furthermore, I am ordering the HOA to cease any further enforcement actions against Mr. Harrison related to this matter." Patricia made a sound like a strangled gasp. Bill Thompson put his head in his hands. "Additionally," Judge Torres continued, "I am concerned about the allegations of financial mismanagement raised in the complaint. I am ordering the HOA to preserve all financial records and to cooperate fully with the ongoing Corporation Commission investigation. Any destruction or alteration of records will be considered contempt of court." As we left the courtroom, Rachel was practically glowing. That could not have gone better. Torres saw right through their argument. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we wait for the Corporation Commission investigation to conclude. Depending on what they find, this could expand beyond just our civil case." I did not have to wait long for an answer. The following week, the Corporation Commission released a preliminary report of their findings. The report detailed systematic financial mismanagement, including the inflated landscaping contracts Sandra had identified, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and improper use of HOA reserve funds for non-approved expenditures. The report also found evidence of selective enforcement, documenting numerous violations throughout the neighborhood that had gone unaddressed, while Patricia focused her enforcement efforts on specific homeowners who had opposed her decisions. The commission ordered an immediate change in HOA leadership, placing the association under temporary oversight while they completed their full investigation. Patricia was removed as president and banned from serving in any HOA leadership role pending the investigation's outcome. More seriously, the commission referred their findings to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Using HOA funds for personal benefit could constitute fraud and embezzlement under Arizona law. The news coverage intensified. My millennial beige house became a symbol for homeowner rights advocates across the country. I did interviews with national news programs, talking about the need for HOA reform and greater oversight of these organizations that wielded significant power over people's homes and lives. But the strangest part of the whole experience was watching the neighborhood's reaction. With Patricia removed from power, people started talking more openly about their frustrations with the HOA's aggressive enforcement. A grassroots movement started to reform the community's governing documents, simplifying the rules and expanding the approved color palette. Derek organized a neighborhood meeting, independent of the official HOA, to discuss reforms. More than 70 residents attended, crowding into the community center on a Tuesday evening. The energy was completely different from the contentious board meeting weeks earlier. People were collaborative, constructive, focused on building something better. Margaret, the older woman who had spoken up at the previous meeting, facilitated the discussion. "We have an opportunity here," she said. "Patricia's removal is not just about punishing wrongdoing, it is about rethinking how we want to govern ourselves." The group formed committees to tackle different issues, updating the aesthetic guidelines, reforming the enforcement process, and ensuring financial transparency. I joined the Aesthetic Guidelines Committee, figuring I had earned that right. Over the next month, we worked to create a new approved color palette that was both attractive and diverse. We included input from local architects and design professionals. The result was a palette that maintained visual harmony while giving homeowners real choice. Millennial beige was quietly removed from the list. In June, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office filed criminal charges against Patricia Whitmore. She was charged with 3 counts of fraud and 2 counts of embezzlement related to the landscaping contracts and other financial improprieties. Her brother-in-law was also charged as a co-conspirator. The criminal case moved through the system over the following months. Patricia maintained her innocence, claiming she had not realized the landscaping contracts were problematic and that any financial irregularities were honest mistakes. But the evidence was overwhelming. Sandra's documents, combined with the forensic audit, painted a clear picture of deliberate wrongdoing. In September, facing the prospect of a trial that would publicly air all the evidence against her, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of fraud and 1 count of embezzlement. She was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution of $47,000 to the HOA for the misappropriated funds. The real estate agent who had been her partner in the scheme of driving out residents and profiting from the subsequent sales was also charged and accepted a separate plea deal, losing her real estate license and receiving probation. Meanwhile, my civil lawsuit against the HOA was settled. The HOA agreed to drop all fines against me, pay my attorney's fees, and issue a formal apology. More importantly, the settlement included provisions requiring the HOA to adopt the new governance reforms the neighborhood committees had developed. By October, the neighborhood had implemented sweeping changes. The new board, elected in a special vote, was diverse and committed to transparency. Financial statements were posted online monthly. Enforcement actions required review by multiple board members to prevent selective targeting. And the approved color palette actually made sense, which brought me to a decision I had been putting off: what to do about my millennial beige house. Derek came over one Saturday afternoon in late October, carrying beers as had become our custom. We sat on my back patio, looking at the house's exterior. The millennial beige looked no better after 5 months. If anything, it had somehow gotten worse, developing weird weathering patterns that made it look mottled and diseased. "You going to repaint?" Derek asked. "I am thinking about it," I admitted. I proved my point. The HOA is reformed, Patricia is in jail, I do not need to keep living in an ugly house just for spite. "What color are you thinking?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a picture I had been considering. It was a soft sage green, warm and inviting without being too bold. It was on the new approved palette, which actually meant something now that the palette had been created thoughtfully. "That is nice," Derek said. "But you know what? You should keep it beige a little longer." "Why?" "Because that house has become famous. People drive by to take pictures of it. There are articles online about it. It is like a monument to standing up for yourself against petty tyranny. That means something." I laughed, but he had a point. The ugly millennial beige had served a purpose beyond just malicious compliance. It had exposed corruption, reformed a broken system, and reminded people that sometimes standing up for principle matters more than keeping the peace. Still, I was tired of living in an ugly house. In November, I hired Miguel and his crew again. When I told him I wanted to repaint in sage green, he looked relieved. "Thank God," he said. "I was worried you were going to ask for another horrible color." "No, I am done with horrible colors. I just want my house to look nice again." The crew completed the work in 4 days. The sage green was beautiful, warm, and sophisticated. It complemented the desert landscaping and made my house look like a home again instead of a statement. When they finished, I stood in my driveway looking at the transformation. Derek came over, Margaret walked by with her little white dog, and several other neighbors stopped to admire the new color. "It looks wonderful," Margaret said. "Much better than the yellow or the beige. Thank you for speaking up at that meeting," I told her. "I do not think we would have gotten anywhere without you," she smiled. Sometimes the older generation has to remind everyone what really matters. Community is not about everyone conforming to the same standard. It is about people respecting each other and working together. That evening, I got an email from Rachel. Patricia's jail sentence had begun that day. Attached to the email was a newspaper article about her reporting to the Maricopa County Jail facility. The article recapped the whole saga, from the initial paint dispute to the criminal charges. I read the article feeling a complex mix of emotions. I had not set out to destroy anyone's life. I had just wanted to keep my yellow house, or at least choose a color I liked. But Patricia's downfall was ultimately her own doing. The corruption and abuse of power had been there long before I painted my house millennial beige. I had just been the catalyst that exposed it. Over the following months, life in Saguaro Heights gradually returned to normal. The new HOA board was competent and reasonable. They focused on actual issues like maintaining common areas and organizing community events, not on micromanaging every aspect of residents' homes. The neighborhood Facebook group, which had been a constant source of drama during the paint dispute, became a place where people shared recipes and organized block parties. Derek started a monthly poker game that became surprisingly popular. Margaret continued her daily walks, often stopping to chat with neighbors about their gardens or grandchildren. I went back to my quiet work-from-home life, but with more friends in the neighborhood than I had ever had before. People knew my name now. They waved when they drove past. I got invited to barbecues and holiday parties. In December, Sandra stopped by with a homemade pie. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for having the courage to fight back. I should have done it years ago." "You helped when it mattered," I told her. "The documents you provided made all the difference." Still, I let fear stop me from doing the right thing. You did not. That took guts. After she left, I thought about what she had said. Had it taken guts, or had I just been stubborn and annoyed? Probably both, but the outcome had been worth it. An entire community was better off because one person had refused to accept an unfair demand. The irony, of course, was that I ended up painting my house anyway. Not the cheerful yellow I had started with, and certainly not the millennial beige I had chosen out of spite, but a new color that I actually loved. And I had chosen it freely, without coercion or threat of fines, from a palette that made sense. In January, almost 9 months after receiving that first violation notice, I received one final letter from the HOA. This one was different. It was a formal apology, signed by all 5 members of the new board, acknowledging the previous board's overreach and thanking me for my role in prompting necessary reforms. The letter concluded with a paragraph that made me smile. Your willingness to stand up for your rights, even when it was uncomfortable and contentious, ultimately benefited the entire community. The reforms we have implemented will protect all residents from arbitrary enforcement and ensure that our HOA serves its members rather than the other way around. Thank you for your courage and persistence. I put the letter in a frame and hung it in my home office, next to a photograph of my house painted in that terrible millennial beige. It served as a reminder that sometimes the right thing to do is also the difficult thing, and that standing on principle matters even when it feels absurd. Derek saw the framed items when he came over to watch a football game in February. "You are really keeping that photo?" he asked, laughing. "Hell yes. That photo represents one of the most satisfying experiences of my life. Fighting your HOA? No. Proving that sometimes following the rules exactly as written is the best form of rebellion. They wanted me to paint my house beige, so I painted it the most aggressively ugly beige imaginable. They could not do a damn thing about it because I had followed their rules to the letter. And now you have a nice green house and Patricia Whitmore has a criminal record. Justice served, I would say. The story could have ended there with everything neatly resolved, but life rarely works that way. In March, a year after this whole saga began, I received a phone call from a producer at a cable television network. They wanted to make a documentary about HOA abuse and reform, focusing on my case as the central narrative. I was hesitant at first. The whole experience had been exhausting, and part of me just wanted to move on. But the producer explained that HOA abuse was a widespread problem affecting millions of Americans, and that sharing my story could help others understand their rights and inspire reforms in other communities. After thinking it over and consulting with Rachel, I agreed to participate. The documentary filmed over several weeks, interviewing me, Rachel, Sandra, Margaret, Derek, and dozens of other Saguaro Heights residents. They even got footage of the community center meetings and interviews with the Corporation Commission investigators. The documentary aired in June, titled Beige Rebellion: How One Paint Color Exposed HOA Corruption. It was surprisingly compelling, weaving together my personal story with broader context about HOA governance issues nationwide. The producers had found similar cases across the country where HOA boards had abused their authority, though few had ended with criminal charges like Patricia's case. The documentary sparked a national conversation about HOA reform. State legislatures began proposing bills to increase oversight and protect homeowners' rights. National news outlets ran segments about HOA abuses. Advocacy groups formed to support people in disputes with their HOAs, and me. I became an accidental spokesman for HOA reform, giving interviews and even testifying before the Arizona legislature about proposed reforms to state HOA law. It was surreal, going from a quiet work-from-home professional to someone who was recognized in grocery stores and thanked for standing up to HOA tyranny. But through it all, I never lost sight of what had started this whole thing: a simple desire to have some control over my own home. That fundamental issue resonated with people because it touched on something deeply American. The idea that your home is your castle and nobody should have unlimited power to dictate what you do with it. By the time summer arrived, life had settled into a new normal. The documentary's initial buzz faded. The news cycle moved on to other stories. Patricia Whitmore served her jail sentence quietly, largely forgotten except by those of us who had lived through the experience. I continued living in my sage green house, enjoying the peaceful, properly governed neighborhood that had emerged from the chaos. The HOA functioned as it was supposed to, maintaining common areas and organizing community events without harassing residents over trivial matters. On a warm evening in July, the neighborhood held a block party. Someone had set up a projector and was showing a movie on a large inflatable screen. Kids ran around playing tag while adults chatted and ate barbecue. It felt like a real community, the kind of place people moved to the suburbs hoping to find. Derek found me near the dessert table, loading up on brownies. "You ever regret any of this?" he asked. I thought about the question seriously. No, it was stressful and sometimes scary, but it was worth it. Look around. This is what a healthy HOA looks like, people enjoying living here instead of being afraid of violation notices. You think Patricia regrets it? Probably. But her biggest regret is probably getting caught, not what she did. Margaret joined us, her little white dog trotting beside her. "Are you two talking about Patricia?" she asked with an amused smile. "Just wondering if she learned anything from all this," Derek said. "Some people never learn," Margaret replied. "They are too invested in being right to admit when they are wrong." Patricia was like that. She convinced herself that ruling the HOA with an iron fist was for everyone's benefit, when really it was just about power and control. "And fraud," I added. "Do not forget the actual crimes." Yes, that too. But the financial crimes were symptoms of the deeper problem. She believed she was entitled to run this community however she wanted, with no accountability. That kind of thinking leads to all sorts of corruption. As the evening wore on and the movie started, I sat on a lawn chair watching my neighbors enjoy themselves. Children laughed, adults chatted comfortably, and the warm desert air carried the smell of mesquite barbecue. This was what community was supposed to feel like. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Just saw the documentary won an award for public affairs programming. Congratulations, you are officially famous." I texted back. "I just wanted to paint my house." Her response made me laugh. "And instead you took down a corrupt HOA president and sparked a national reform movement. Overachiever." The following week, I received a letter from the Arizona legislature. The HOA reform bill they had been working on had passed both chambers and was headed to the governor's desk for signature. The bill included provisions for greater financial transparency, restrictions on selective enforcement, easier processes for homeowners to challenge HOA decisions, and increased penalties for board members who abused their positions. The letter thanked me for my testimony and noted that my case had been instrumental in building support for the reforms. It was gratifying to know that something positive had come from the whole exhausting experience. In August, I got unexpected news. Patricia had been released early from jail for good behavior after serving 11 months of her 18-month sentence. She would complete the rest of her sentence on probation. According to the news article Derek forwarded me, she had moved to Tucson and was working as a bookkeeper, no longer involved in any HOA leadership. I felt nothing when I read the news. No anger, no satisfaction, nothing. Patricia Whitmore had become irrelevant to my life. She had faced consequences for her actions, the neighborhood had been reformed, and life had moved on. That was enough. As fall approached and the brutal Phoenix summer heat began to ease, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. It had been an incredible journey from that first violation notice to where we were now. I had learned things about myself I had not known, discovered a capacity for stubbornness and strategic thinking that had surprised me. But more importantly, I had learned about the power of standing up for yourself, even when it feels ridiculous or petty. Sometimes the hill you choose to die on really matters, even if it is just about paint colors. One Saturday in October, exactly 18 months after receiving that first violation notice, I was working in my front yard when a car pulled up. A young couple got out, looking at houses in the neighborhood. They walked over and introduced themselves as potential buyers. "We love the neighborhood," the woman said, "but we have heard stories about HOA problems. Is it really as bad as the internet says?" I smiled. "It used to be, but things have changed a lot in the past year. The HOA is reasonable now, focused on actual community issues instead of micromanaging everyone's homes." "We heard about what happened with the paint color," the man said. "That was you, right? Guilty as charged. That was amazing. We have been dealing with our current HOA in temp, and they are nightmares. Seeing someone actually fight back and win gives us hope." We talked for 20 minutes, and I walked them through the reforms that had been implemented and how the neighborhood was different now. By the time they left, they were seriously considering buying here. A week later, Derek told me they had made an offer on a house 3 streets over. The documentary continued to have impact long after its initial airing. I received emails regularly from people dealing with their own HOA issues, asking for advice or just sharing their stories. Rachel started a small side practice specifically for HOA disputes, finding that there was significant demand for attorneys willing to take on these cases. In November, I was invited to speak at a national conference on community association governance. Standing at a podium in front of hundreds of HOA board members, property managers, and homeowner advocates felt surreal. But I told my story honestly, emphasizing that the goal was not to destroy HOAs, but to ensure they operated fairly and transparently. HOAs serve an important function, I told the audience. They maintain common areas, organize communities, and preserve property values. But they only work when they are accountable to their members, and when the rules are applied consistently and reasonably. The moment an HOA board starts to see itself as rulers rather than servants of the community, problems begin. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Even board members who had initially seemed skeptical came up afterward to share their own stories and discuss how they could improve their governance. As the year drew to a close, I took stock of everything that had changed. My house was painted a beautiful sage green that I loved. The neighborhood was thriving under new leadership. Patricia Whitmore was serving out her probation in another city, no longer a threat to anyone. And I had accidentally become part of a national conversation about HOA reform that was leading to real legislative changes. Not bad for someone who just wanted to keep his yellow house. On New Year's Eve, the neighborhood held another party at the community center. This had become a tradition, apparently, though I had not attended previous years. This time I went, enjoying the celebration with neighbors who had become genuine friends. At midnight, as people cheered and hugged and made resolutions, Margaret found me near the refreshment table. "What is your resolution for the new year?" she asked. "To have a nice, quiet, drama-free year," I said. "No more fighting with HOAs or becoming accidentally famous," she laughed. "Sometimes life has other plans, but you handled yourself well through all of this. You should be proud. I am just glad it is over." "Is it though? You have become a voice for homeowner rights. That is not something you can just walk away from." She was right, of course. Even as I hoped for a quiet year, I knew my involvement in HOA reform would continue. There were too many people still dealing with abusive boards, too many communities that needed the kind of changes we had implemented in Sagaro Heights. But for tonight, I was just going to enjoy the party and celebrate with my neighbors. Tomorrow could worry about itself. As I drove home that night, I passed my sage greenhouse and smiled. It looked perfect, exactly as a house should look. No violation notices, no threats, no drama. Just a home that was truly mine in a community that finally understood what that meant. The whole experience had taught me something valuable. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones that seem silly on the surface. Fighting over paint colors might sound trivial, but it was really about dignity, autonomy, and the right to make decisions about your own property. Those are principles worth defending, even if it means painting your house the ugliest shade of beige imaginable. And in the end, that was the real victory. Not destroying Patricia Whitmore or becoming famous or sparking legislative reforms, though those were all positive outcomes. The real victory was standing up for myself and my rights as a homeowner, refusing to be bullied by someone who had forgotten that HOAs exist to serve their members, not to rule over them. I parked in my driveway and looked up at my house one more time. The sage green looked beautiful in the moonlight, warm and welcoming. This was home. This was worth fighting for, and if another HOA president ever tried to push me around again, well, I knew exactly what to do. I had a framed photo of a millennial beige house hanging in my office as a reminder.